Sorry, we're clicking all the wrong buttons before this thing starts. Here we go. Step into epic stages where your journey begins. Our shells are stacked high where the magic never ends. From dice that hold true to tomes ancient and wise, we've got all the essentials for your game to arise. With adventure in mind, we craft every piece to make your campaign flourish. Your stories increase for every TTRPG dream. All the topics refined. Come find your next quest. Leave the mundane behind. Epic stages is where you find satisfaction. We bring the spark, you bring the passion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic stages where legends find traction. To explore with surface that shines, whether in person or more. Need advice on your journey? We're here to assist. For novice and veteran, no which won't be missed. We've got what you need from the basic to the bed to bring your world to life with a masterful hand. From maps that expand to characters that bind. Epic stages always with adventure in mind. Epic stages is where you find satisfaction. We bring the spark, you bring the passion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic stages where legends find traction. Elevate your game with custom pieces so fine, handcrafted with care, designed to make you shine. From miniature heroes to landscapes fast, we build every detail to make the magic last. When the final dust is rolled and the journey is done, we offer keepsakes ever mighty of the battles you won. In every treasure we offer, memories are signed. Epic stages, always with adventure in mind. Epic stages is where you find satisfaction. We bring the spark, you bring the passion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic stages where legends find traction. All right. Here we are. Welcome to the night show. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. Apparently, Baby Brain is just kicking my butt. That intro was all full of mistakes. We're just going to ignore that and push on, though. Welcome to episode 27 of this season's show. And we're going to go over the topics. We're doing oil and water, the mixing of inconstant groups. We're joined by two wonderful star guests. I'm going to have them introduce themselves right off the bat. We're going to start with Dr. Sarah because she's right there, right and ready to go. Let's go ahead and mute and let us know who you are, what you're about, where people find you, all that fun stuff.
There. Thanks, Rook. I'm Sarah Ratekin, and I am a strong believer that work should not be the worst part of our day. So I help organizations understand why people hate their jobs and what they can do different to make it better. You can find me at happinessiscourage.com.
Okay, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Anything else to add on there? Anything you're working on or anything like that?
Yes, but I want to have this conversation first.
Oh, all right. We'll get back to it. Well, haha. All right. And then you were Chuck before we started. Now you are Money Marci. So Marci, let's hear about you. Who are you? Where you at? What you doing? All that fun stuff. Where can people find you?
They can find me right here. I am Money Marci. My nickname is also Chuck, but that's another story altogether. I am a financial literacy educator, author, and speaker, and I help people improve their relationship and understanding of financial decisions they make in their everyday life. You can find me at moneymarci.com. And I'd love to see you there, but I'm looking forward to our chatting tonight.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to definitely have to check that out in the near future, along with people watching. So, first things up. Yeah, there's Younger. Wahaha. First things first, Younger appears. Let's talk about tonight's topic. We're talking about mixing oil and water, right? Two things that don't necessarily flow together, but when mixed and lit on fire, they explode, right? Kind of like a lot of things in what we do and how we do things. We're going to focus on what the heck I mean by inconstant. So instead of inconsistent, there's a slight definition difference between the two words. So inconstant is frequently changing, variable, or irregular, right? So when you're dealing with that kind of stuff, it is more of it is never the same. Not that it isn't lacking, it is just something new every single time, right? So That being that, when I talk about mixing oil and water, how does that apply to your stuff? When you think of that term, how does it apply to you? We're going to start with Marci this time.
Let me make sure I'm on. Okay. Well, it's now I gotta kind of reframe everything. So you're talking about things mixing that shouldn't go together and what kind of happens with them, right?
Right, exactly.
So you're talking about in terms of financial with me being Money Marcy and all, I
Heck
guess.
yeah, let's go.
I'm trying to
No, you're good. You're
I'm
good. You're
trying to
good.
go with it. So it's you know money is something we use every day. We all think we understand it, but no one ever taught us. So you've got that disparity of something you're assumed to know how to use without ever having had the chance to learn how to use it appropriately. And that's comes in is that there's this expectation that you somehow from the cosmos understood what to do with your money. And that's where I think where I come in is helping people bridge that gap from what they know, what they should know, what they'd like to know. Um, and because we don't talk about money, they never know who to ask and how to bridge that gap. And that's that disparity, that oil and water mix where, I try to make it where they don't explode, where you can build a bridge. I'm a canal builder, where we can change those levels and have that gentle conversion.
We love metaphors here, so I'm going to hit on that later because that sounds like a great point of conversation. But we're going to jump over to Dr. Sarah and kind of jump into your realm of things. What is something that you consider like the oil and water that you deal with in your day to day?
The first thing that comes to mind is the fact that we have 5, almost 6 generations of people in the workforce with radically different perspectives on what it means to be an employee or a supervisor, leader type human, with different expectations on work life meshing together. Some people think it shouldn't at all. Some people think it should be very deeply married. And those expectations are so radically different that they, in and of themselves, are creating a ton of friction within organizations. And I think contributing to a lot of the job dissatisfaction, which then leads right into life dissatisfaction. And those numbers are high. I mean, only like a quarter of the global workforce is excited to be at work every day. That's problematic from a human experience perspective. It's also extremely problematic. I think this touches on Marci's realm, but like companies are cutting a check every pay period to people who aren't super stoked to be there and aren't maybe doing their most awesome work because of that. So it is certainly a problem, but it doesn't have to be. I think of how you can mix water and oil sometimes. You have to be intentional in how you do it, but emulsions can happen, right? And knowing how to do that means you've kind of found the magic spell to create this hybrid space that's neither one or the other, but a potentially awesome combination of the two.
Like how you made a little fantasy tie in there with the magic. That was beautiful. I do have to point out an example, right? Is older generations generally say you're welcome, whereas younger generations say no problem when they solve someone's issue. And it's just a conceptual thing, whereas older generations, help is a boon, a gift, things like that. We expect to say thank you, whereas younger generations, it's kind of our expectation, so it's no problem, it's no extra burden, blah blah blah. So I think that's a great talking point of generational differences, which is really easy to get into for the TTRPG things, but I'll get there because that's one of my talking points. Wahaha. Jumping over to younger. In your opinion, what are some spaces in the TTRPG space that are those oil and water mixtures? Right. I think we nailed one on the head right off the bat as a generational difference. You are muted, sir.
I would say that if we're talking, depends on the fantasy, but it could be like a cultural, or a long term overview, like oh, these two countries have been warring for generations. It's whether it be a family dispute or like orcs versus dwarves, that kind of thing. If you're going to go on the very baseline of that type of conflicts.
Okay, interesting. So in our TTRPGs that we do and play and all that fun stuff, a lot of our experiences are melding those groups together, right? From a story perspective, it generally don't have a group of elves running around together causing havoc. You can, and sometimes it's really funny, but generally there's a pretty good mix of the possible characters that you can have, right? Um, and
I got a great
I'm listening. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Lord of the Rings, Gimli and the Elven Archer, they have two very different cultures. They don't mesh well at all at the beginning. They're always like at each other's throats. And then like it becomes more of a friendly competition. As to be like, yes, well ours is better because we had this many orcs dispatched. So obviously the Elven way is better than the Dwarven way, so on and so forth, where they're able to overcome that, in a semblance of a togetherness,
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Now, speaking of a friendly competition, we're going to jump over to Marci. Where is friendly competition a good place when you're talking money?
Well, certainly I'll bring that back down. Certainly, it becomes what you can do to bring out the best in yourself and the best in other people. So a friendly competition in the workforce might be hitting targets. It might be understanding stuff. You're not necessarily going to say, here, my 401k is bigger than your 401k, but you want to show that you do have targets, that you can achieve things and find the things that you can talk about and work together on them, and what you each bring to the table by having conversations. One of my key phrases is let's talk about money, finding the things you can talk about, finding the ways you can encourage each other to reach your goals. That becomes a way you can encourage competition and growth.
Gotcha. So, just as a follow up to that, you would say that having some kind of friendly competition when it comes to money can be helpful, or is it more hindrance in the long run, short run? Is it one of those middle grounds, or where does it hit, you think?
It depends on what you're competing and of course what you're willing to share. You're talking about money, but you're talking about it in the idea thing, unless you're in a company together or you have goals or whatever else that you can share. Because as much as I tell people to talk about money, there's things you're not necessarily going to share either, unless it's with the financial professionals in your life. So it's finding the balance in that, in the goals that you can share and compete while encouraging the other person to achieve their financial independence or achieve those goals. Hey, we want to go on this vacation together. We're each going to build our vacation funds to X amount so that this can happen, and then compete to get there first. Whatever it is, find the ways to encourage people. So you want a friendly competition.
Okay, so it is helpful. That's good to hear then. Kind of jumping on the vacation bandwagon there, Dr. Sarah. When we're talking about the vacation and positive, how much of it is important to dangle carrots in front of people when they're having those problems in the workforce that we kind of talked about at the beginning?
I think it's really important to be mindful of which carrots you dangle and how you do that. I mean, Americans typically are really terrible at taking our time off, and I hope that changes with the newer generations coming into the workforce. But there has historically been this paradigm that I don't have time for vacation because I need to prove that I am a dedicated employee. So even having the carrot dangled of you can take your vacation time, I can't even tell you how much PTO gets lost within organizations because people don't take the time off. And then the ripple effect of that is really catastrophic. I also think that it's helpful to understand the whole narrative around like money can't buy happiness. And I think that's something that is often trotted out by organizations that want to justify paying their people less than maybe is due to them or less than market standards by putting something else in place of financial stability as a justification for the time that we spend, right? So like, we're a purpose-driven organization. Money can't buy happiness, but we're a family. That's all trash. And the reality is, if people can't pay their bills and they can't feed their family and they can't do a few of the things that they also just want to do, then the lack of money or resources can certainly buy unhappiness. So I think companies, leaders, organizations need to be really mindful of how they incentivize people getting excited about being at work. And the truth is, many of them are not doing a great job right now.
It's fair. Younger, do you think you get enough paid time off yet?
Oh yeah, all the time. But in reality, so I'm gonna hit back at a flashback of my life years ago. I was in the military, and there's two very different ways you could look about this in regards to, but just from a personal perspective, what are the things that you actually care about, like as an individual, when it comes to like what your expectations are? Like most people have the expectation of I'm going to work this long, get paid this much, so on and so forth. But we all know in the real world, you might have contractual obligations, so on and so forth. That might snip those a little bit, or it's like, oh yeah, we did say that, but things change and stuff. And so I remember when I first joined the military, not the whole military is like this, but a very small section was very improperly run. And there was a lot of wasted time and effort. And it was a lot of times you had more people standing around just simply waiting for the clock to go because somebody was like, oh, well, 5 o'clock's not done yet. So it didn't really matter how hard you worked. It just mattered how long you worked. And so like productivity wasn't really the objective as much as it was like, oh yeah, head count. And so I feel like personally that there should be other things that you could do, like to mitigate those problems. Like, hey, still within the scope of your professional responsibilities, but maybe we can further develop these soldiers. Give them additional trainings and so on and so forth. If there's this like excess amount of time, and you just have them sitting around a motor pool sweeping for 2 hours, even though they swept it an hour ago. When I became into the position of a non-commissioned officer and I had a bunch of soldiers, the thing that I used was like, hey, like I obviously can't let you guys go like hours and hours before you're done, but I can make sure that like, if you're done, like you are done. And I might be able to squeeze like you guys get an hour off because you guys completed 2 times the amount of workload of all the other crews. And so because you fulfilled, the operational mission tasks, and I've been given like the responsibility of completing those tasks and the leeway to be able to have the time to be able to tell my guys when they can go and when they can stay and so on and so forth. I was trusted by my leadership and I rewarded them for their efforts. And even just an hour early, just saying, hey, you have this deadline, them being like, okay, yeah, if we get this done before that deadline, we can go home. You will get so much more work out of these guys. You'll squeeze them like lemons and just for all they're worth, and they'll be happy. Right, so it's fine.
You calm down there. No squeezing lemons on screen, please. Damn. But I think you all bring some fantastic points with all that, and I'm going to ramble here for a second. So all of this sounds a lot like objective ways to get to things, right? So when we talk about oil and water, when we're talking about these groups, these inconstant groups, right? They're always changing. Generally, this is like players aren't there on time, or they are not there a week, they're there the next week, they're coming with their friends, they forgot all their equipment, all that fun stuff, right? When we think of just oil and water, we want to get the oil and water to be a stable state, right? It's okay to have oil and water together when you're cooking and whatnot, right? Sometimes that's what you need for what you're doing. But you need to have the right mixture and the right amounts of stuff, right? And how we get there is by using all of your various things that we just talked about, right? The appropriate conversations, right? To set up objectives, to have friendly competitions in the games, right? Motivate people to come back and play with their groups and friends. You can have those carrots that are dangled in front of people to make sure that they are having that fun time, right? Those vacation days, essentially, right? Giving their rewards when they do things. Making sure people want to be there and do things. And then last but not least, to jump into the, like, if they do well, reward them, right? Be able to be like, hey, we have a clear defined goal. These are our objectives. We as a company talk about setting expectations literally all the time. That's one of our big talking points. Because it is the solution to 90% of the problems is people's expectations not going awry, right? Everyone knows that, you make a list and it's just a list of things that can go wrong along the way. But at least having a list, you would have an idea of where you're going to end up, what you're going to do, what the thing is, all that fun stuff. Younger, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, people knowing where they belong. I feel like that's a really good way for the oil and water thing. Like, if you have two people and they think that they're in the other person's lane, shit ain't never gonna work out. It's just gonna be a constant battle every day. But if it's like, hey, I'm in this lane and you're in that lane, and we can each do our own little thing and come together, like where it makes sense, rather than just fighting each other, that is a huge balancing thing that can increase productivity in whatever you're doing, or happiness, or whatever the scale is, upwards of beneficial.
Nice. As a side note, I gotta ask, who's our friend that's on the screen that is popping up and down?
That's Morgana.
Fantastic. I love the name. That's great.
Morgana.
Right? So as a silly question for you guys, right? When you think oil and water, what food do you think of? What's the first food that pops into your mind when you think of the term oil and water? I know this is a silly question, but it'll make sense in a minute.
I mean, I think of a marinade.
Marinade. Okay. Solid choice. Interesting. Okay. Marci?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that it's a marinade, or potentially a dressing where you mix a lot of things that you have to mix and use them while they're in that mixed state, because otherwise they won't be quite the same.
Okay. Younger?
You see, these are all calculated and intelligent and realistic things. Whereas I don't imagine whatever the food is that's being cooked to be food at that point, because I imagine my house catching on fire. And somebody grabbing the pan and being like, "Oh God, there's a fire!" And just lighting the house up and burning down. And so it's like, oh, I guess we're going to McDonald's.
Everyone's got a Thanksgiving turkey story. But the one I think of is soup, right? We're talking like tom soup or anything like that, right? Where the base is your water and all that fun stuff, and then it has a slick oil or spicy oil or something on the top that gives it flavor, right? So they're both important parts of the elements we talked about. We're talking about marinades. Marinades are great choices, right? Because you're prepping something else and making it better. And you mix oil and water like crazy, so you can shake it up, add as many spices or other flavorings as you can to it, to give your meat or veggies or whatever you're marinating just a little bit of extra bam, little boom, little bit of spice before the spice. Yeah, bam. See, you got it. Thank you for getting my terrible references. But with that, right, we go into our mindsets of like, how do we be the marinade for our business? For you two, you guys both pick marinades. This is gonna be really easy. Me and Younger got to figure out like, how do we be the exploding turkey and how to be the soup. But you two both are like, how are you guys the marinade of your specialty? We're gonna start with Dr. Sarah on this one.
The reality is, if you don't keep flexible in your approach, you're in trouble. And I think the same thing is true for marinade or for organizations. If you just sit on things too long, everything's going to fall apart, entropy is going to happen, and shenanigans will ensue. And so to me, that's a big piece of it, is being flexible and responsive, proactive as opposed to reactive. I don't really want to have the house fire because I spilled the marinade all over the burner. I think it's really important to be intentional in how you approach the business operations. And I also think it's important to keep things fresh. I really don't want to have rancid oil or disgusting moldy liquid in my marinade, right? So how do I keep the ingredients fresh? How do I keep things interesting? How do I keep them relevant? And that, to me, brings a much more delightful flavor as opposed to the disgustingness that is potentially available to us.
Nice. Miss Marci.
Well, for me, everything is about building bridges and finding ways for everyone to win, which means you work with it and you pull the best elements from both of them and find your balance in that when you're dealing with oil and water, whether you're making a spicy soup or you're making a marinade. You want to find the balance that makes it work. You want to just find the way to have everything win. Get all the flavors, get all well integrated.
Interesting. Okay. Younger, exploding Tupperware or kitchenware or burning down the house. How does that apply to our business? I'm very concerned.
Okay,
Uh,
so let's say that you unfortunately have destroyed your kitchen with scorch marks everywhere. And the big thing is you have to move forward from that, and you have to like fix your mistakes if they're fixable, and or your house burnt down and you have to let it go and build up a new one somewhere else. You got to have a whole new plan or whatever, but you got to make it work. You still got to do the thing. No matter the circumstance is in that moment, you're in that moment. So, and you can only affect things in the present. You can't go back and change it. So you got to keep on moving forward. I bet you didn't expect a response that good, did you?
that was great, fantastic. I was way more concerned about what was coming out of your mouth until you said that. So thank you. So onto my thought. The soup, right? The soup of the business is we're kind of a catch-all that gets as much as we can out of everything we make it, right? You don't waste anything with soup. You use everything you got. You might make a lot of it, and hopefully it'll last you a long time. You talked about making sure that things are, good and edible and fresh and all that fun stuff. But there are plenty of soups where if you just keep the heat going, you can just keep throwing things in there, and they're still gonna taste delicious. You're not gonna know what it is, but it's gonna taste good. Uh, but all the silly food bits aside, we're going to talk about the kind of dangers of the oil and the water and how they mix, right? Because we kind of talked about a balance. You, Marci, talked about getting your canals set right, right? But in a canal, there's a lot of water and not a lot of oil, right? Specifically in canals, the oil is in the machines, right? And without it, they kind of rust and break because they're in water constantly. But when we're talking about that, where do you guys feel is more dangerous, right? Is it more dangerous to have water, which is a representation of things that are abundant and plentiful, or oil, something that takes an excessive amount of work to get a product? What is more dangerous in your side of things? Is it more dangerous to find things that are abundant or things that take effort? We're going to start with Younger, so he has to talk first. Give you guys a couple seconds. Wahaha.
Abundant or take effort. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking of like two kinds of people in general, right? And it's people who think a lot, who do very little, and people who do a lot and think very little. They can both have their pros and cons. One person can be like, I'm going to do it and not have any idea. But, if they do it enough times, they will eventually succeed. Whereas the person who just sits around and thinks about it until they actually take the action, there is going to be zero progress regardless.
I mean, that's a great thing in TTRPGs is you can sit there and plan with your group for 4 hours and then realize the session's over and you didn't actually storm the castle. The princess is still captured by Bowser. You're still having a bad day. You gotta wait till next session and pray.
They actually got on a ship and went to a different...
Yeah, right. There's another castle because you talked outside the front gates for too long.
You gave them time to finish their diplomatic relations with the other hostile nations. Now they have T-Rexes on their side. You waited too long.
Okay, jumping over to Marci.
Well, I'm going to pull up my husband and a story about us because this ties right into what Younger said, which is he is a planner. He is very intentional in things he does. When we first got together and he was learning how to cook, he would sit in front of, he would compare recipes in his mind, and it would take him longer to choose a recipe that he was going to use than it would to actually take the food because he was so intentional in considering all the aspects of it. I'm kind of just throw things together and let's see what happens. We were doing a construction project. Well, we were planning out a construction project in our house of moving a wall to combine some closet space. And he was thinking about it and planning about it. And one night he left the house to go and do some things. And I was like, I'm ready to start this project. I pulled out a sledgehammer and he came by and there was a whole mess of drywall missing. And now we had to start the project. I'm sure we would have eventually got it. And I wouldn't be saying, oh my gosh, when are we going to do this project at this point in time? But it would have taken a lot longer. Once it was started, he was able to get, okay, well, it started. Now we've just got to go ahead and do it. But he would have kept planning. And so here we are, oil and water in the way we look at projects and the way we start them. And it works for us.
Nice.
Sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness rather than to ask for permission.
Well, this wasn't a forgiveness or permission thing. It was just a matter of, when are we going to actually jump in the water? Right. You have to, at a certain point in time, you just have to go for it. And we had already both decided we were doing this project. It was just a matter of when were we going to start it? What other steps did we need to consider? Whatever else. And at a certain point in time, there were answers we wouldn't know until we got in that wall. And we needed to see the wall.
So taking that thought, how does that apply to what you do, though? How does that apply to your money management stuff?
Well, a lot of times people will say, I don't think I can afford to create a savings plan. I don't think I can afford to look at whatever else. And I can say, you know what? Let's put away $5 in savings a week or a month or whatever and see what happens. See how that impacts everything else. Let's take a step, whether it's a big step, a little step, whatever. Let's take a step and see what happens. And it's that first step. It's that stepping out of. I can't say you're stepping out of fear because you're probably just as scared when you take that step, but you're stepping into motion. And trying something and that feels like oil to water. That feels like stepping across a threshold into a different dimension when you change from that the same way you've been doing things to doing something different to see what happens.
I got a phrase you can steal for that one. It's stepping into bravery, right? Because there's no bravery without fear. You can't be brave unless you're afraid. So something to use maybe in the future, stepping into bravery.
Is that a copyright kind of thing?
You'd steal it. I don't care. It'll be right. As a personal example from our business, right? I can tell you exactly of one of the things we did relatively recently, within the last year, probably, is setting up our funnel system for where our money goes, right? And actually dedicating like where stuff goes instead of it just being a giant pile of whenever we decide we need to buy or do things, we just take it out of the pile. It has dedicated places where it go, and it's all titled for the most part. We leave a couple things free so it can wiggle stuff around. But besides that, making that made a huge difference to what our company levels of success looked like. You know what I mean? It was goals and motivations and things like that. And it was the next step forward, right, Younger? You agree? He hates it when we talk about it, but it worked.
$20,000, but it's only for taxes.
Right? Gotta love taxes. Dr. Sarah, jumping over to you, right? When we talk about the oil and water and what's more dangerous for you, we go back to water representing abundance and stuff that's easily come by comparatively to the oil, which takes a lot of work to produce a product. Like for you and what you're doing, what is the more dangerous of the two to have, and how do you mix them fluidly in what you do?
I think I see it more that water is the status quo and oil is the change that is volatile and therefore scary.
Okay.
And the truth is they're both important. They're both important because you can't just throw people into complete and utter chaos and think you're going to have a positive outcome. That tends to lead to madness. A lot of organizations will reorg just for funsies, I think, or to avoid responsibility, which is a whole different topic. But I think there's a balancing act you have to make in the middle. What I'm hearing you talk about a little bit here also is, like Marci and Brooke, I think you both mentioned this, paralysis of analysis, right? Like being stuck in that space where you're so afraid or so unclear on what you want to do, that you just keep making another spreadsheet or making another SWOT diagram or yet another pros and cons list or whatever excuse you have to avoid making the decision and getting out of that status quo. So I don't know that there's not a right answer as far as whether status quo or change is right. It's more understanding which makes the most sense for whatever the goals are. And as you mentioned, if you don't know what your goals are, you're kind of shafted on figuring out what the right decision is in that space. And then I'm thinking about also how this applies to the inconstant aspect, right? So whether it's a role-playing game or it is a team or it's a social group where you have a lot of flux in the participants, whether it is intentional flux because you have certain members who float in and out, or you're set up such that people can just sort of randomly pick up play. I'm thinking of like LARPing, or when I was doing the SCA, we had a lot of people who would float in and out and they were not even members, right? They just come and try it on for size. And so how do you set up your framework to accommodate for those newbies or once in a whileers to pop in and not disrupt what your dedicated team participants are doing? Because otherwise, then everybody's mad too, right? Your regulars are torqued off because they've been dedicated, focusing on a goal they've coalesced around, and they don't want to allow the new people to float in and out. So then you are automatically stymieing potential growth, maybe some new members, and that's messy, right? And humans don't like messy, and humans don't like change. Our brains don't like either one of those. So having some kind of a solid framework helps us allow for that controlled chaos to happen in a way that's beneficial as opposed to destructive.
Gotcha. Okay.
You described the currently ongoing situation within Wizards of the Coast. Everybody's happy with 5e, and then 5.5 has poked its little head out of somebody's butt, and there's a bunch of people who are like, oh yeah, like we want all these changes working in the corporation, and then you got a bunch of people over here with bats saying, leave my 5th edition alone, and it's like, well, let's try to meet in the middle. And so they're like, we're gonna don't worry, 5e guys, we'll have a legacy page for you, so it's not gone, we're not gonna destroy it, and then we can move on to the next thing. And then it made some people be like, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad.
It's dead. Just so we all are in complete understanding, they're going to kill it within the first week. They're gonna go, well, we changed our mind, and there will be nothing we can do about it. But that is the advantage of building your own stories and systems and things like that, is you don't have to deal with that kind of chaos. When you're the one in charge, the chaos is all your fault. The amount of oil you spill on your stove, chaos. That's on you. But going into that, sometimes a little bit of oil on the stove is necessary, right? When we talk about that oil overflowing when we're cooking and stuff. Because sometimes you're just not, like IRL, sometimes you're just not paying attention and it needs to boil over. So you focus on what you're doing before you destroy your potatoes or pasta or whatever the heck you're working on, right? So what are some key giveaways, right? That the stove is boiling over, that the oil and water are not mixing well, and your guys is kind of in your area of expertise. So we're going to jump back to Dr. Sarah one more time. What is a clear sign of like something is going wrong and it needs to get fixed?
Employee turnover is skyrocketing. That's a dead giveaway. If your staff are leaving like rats off of a sinking ship, something is absolutely wrong and you need to figure it out. Actually, you should have figured it out probably 6 months ago, and you're probably screwed in this current moment. But at least if you can triage that, you might salvage something of your organization.
Right. I mean, on that, sometimes you just ruined a dish, right? Sometimes you that oil spilled over, yep, and it's game over. Your kitchen was semi caught on fire. You had to pull out the extinguisher to deal with things, and that can represent like killing all upper and middle management or losing all of your employees because they're just not working for you, right? Because they're not hitting those expectations.
Yep.
When we work with corporations, that's kind of our focus, is fixing that middle space or that top space, because as they say, shit goes downhill. And if you can fix things at the top of the organization, you're generally going to fix things at the bottom. But we'll get into that later. Jumping into that kind of thought, though, that it is okay to restart. You don't have to eat a destroyed dish, right? Especially as a company or as an individual. And I'm sure Younger will talk about the relationship side of things when we get into individuals when I go to his turn. So we'll get to that in a second. Miss Marcy, what about you? What is a clear sign that things have gone wrong, the kitchen is on fire, that kind of thing in your space?
Well, it could be that your debt is growing and getting worse. It could be that you can't manage the payments that you need to manage to make every month to keep things where they are. Um, the two phrases that come to mind is a sunk cost. That means money that's gone out the door and you don't keep throwing money after that. And that's good money after bad. And knowing when something doesn't work, that could be, hey, I've been following this educational path and realize that's not the direction you want to go. So you're not going to necessarily finish up the degree or whatever it is because it's not where you want to be. So why would you? Or it could be a business venture you've started that you hadn't really planned out what it would cost, or whatever type of financial decisions you've made. Hey, I've been putting that $5 a month away, and that turns out I really needed that to pay off my credit card debt or my whatever debt that you have, that now you're falling behind on paychecks or on paying that debt. Whatever it is, you take stock and you have to figure out. I mean, obviously the final line of that might be filing for bankruptcy if you get there, and that's really your I mean, that's the last decision that you can make, because at the point in time you file for bankruptcy, things are out of your hands as to what those resolutions will be. But there are steps along that path where you can say, you know what, this has got to change. This isn't a am I afraid or not. This is that's all that's left.
Makes sense to me. Jumping over to Younger. Younger, when you are observing a group of yahoos and the water is boiling over and catching fire, what is the clear sign that is what is going on for you? What is your, hey, these guys aren't meshing, something's going wrong, we need to fix it one way or the other?
Usually if you're within like a team leader position, you'll be able to realize this really fast. Because shit will not be getting done. They'll be like, hey, why is X not done? And it's like, oh, it's not done because if you have multiple coworkers, if they haven't already chosen a side, they might be like, hey, like so and so is like yelling at whatever, so on and so forth. And it's like, all right, we need to work this out. Whether they actually work it out or not is a whole nother discussion, but it's like, hey, if you guys have beef outside of the workplace, try to leave it outside of the workplace. You got beef in the workplace, let's figure out why you're having the beef. Okay, like, is so and so legitimately upset that X person is not doing their job appropriately? If so, maybe they need proper training. It might not just be a point of, oh, I don't want to do it. It might be the fact of they weren't properly trained on how to do it. They might need a little bit of work with. When you have a new guy, some people can come off more abrasive than others. I've worked with every kind of person you could think of, and confrontational, people who like don't even like want to look you in the eyes, and you have to figure out how to meet people where they are, and then ease them within to it and be like, hey, like, if you use this template, maybe you won't offend X person, who will get pissed off if you say things in a particular manner. It's like, okay, well, if you just follow this formatting, we can avoid some of that if it's over like some telecommunications or email distribution or whatever. If it's like just it might be, hey, you guys can work together, but you need to space each other out. Like, maybe put this person on this side of the room, do this kindergarten style, until you're able to, smooth things over. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, if the other person's not just a complete, you know.
We got it. So, I mean, from what I'm hearing from all of you, is kind of that boiling point is always when productivity hits basically a 0 point or a nil, or it is so unnoticeable it doesn't really matter. In TTRPGs, I would have to say, unless it is specifically built around it, is when players fight, right? When they are like, my character throws a stone and starts fighting. Now, sometimes some players are like that, and that's how they have fun. And as long as the person they're poking at is fine with it and whatnot, cool beans. But like sometimes it's just out of the blue. The rogue says, "I'm going to stab that guy in the back because he's been talking mad shit the entire session." You know what I mean? That is the point where you get to step in and go, "No, that didn't happen," or "That no," or you let it happen and things boil over, right? You let the fire happens and things extinguish and the story's over because you don't want to deal with this group of yahoos anymore, right? But we go back to getting to the root of that before it happens is figuring out where their interest lied, right? Having their what's going on with them, right? If someone's having a bad day and they bring it to a table, Younger talked about, outside work stuff. Sometimes the table itself is a great place to bring those problems without you realizing it, right? You can kind of work through them quietly while you're playing. Killing goblins is great therapy for, doing things. But then there are also times where you don't roll a single 20 throughout the night. It's all 2s, 3s, and 1s, and you're just having the worst day. And it compounds and things get, upset, right? For when you're having those kind of tables, it's okay to talk to your players, right? We talk about this quite often. Is, hey, step aside, talk to people. It's okay to let the chaotic element of your table take a break, right? If they're having a rough time, it's okay to excuse them or politely ask them to cool down, or go have a beer instead of playing for a while because they're too much. You know what I mean? Usually when you have that confrontation and talk to someone at your table when they're doing that, they are going to realize that they are being a jackwagon and either apologize to people they've been a jackwagon or they will leave because they are embarrassed. And in all honesty, if you leave a table because you're embarrassed on something that you did, you were in the wrong. There's no getting around that, unfortunately, right? You as an adult get to make those decisions and follow through with them. Hopefully, you make the right decision and apologize and come back later. But sometimes mixing that oil and water is removing one or the other, right? Getting part of the problem out of the way. It doesn't have to be a lot, doesn't have to be all of it, but sometimes it's just a bit, scooping some fat off the top, pulling out some, whatever, so that when things boil over, it isn't as bad, whatever, right? Jumping into the kind of the thing we talked about at the very beginning was the generational differences, right? This is probably the biggest oil and water-esque setting for lots of groups and people. And I'm going to ask you all about your generational observations, right? And kind of your expertise. What is the basic outline for the different groups that you've seen, right? Since Dr. Sarah is the one that kind of brought this up, I want to let you start. When you're dealing with companies and individuals and things like that, what is like, where do you tag people? How do you categorize that for you?
Well, the challenge with generational differences is people get really wrapped up in what generational band that they think they or somebody else belongs in. And that is a dangerous assumption to make, like most assumptions. Because a big piece of the generational, is like any other demographic that we use to describe groups of people. What it really means is you had similar experiences. So like my spouse and I are only 7 years apart, but he's actually more like a boomer than he is an Xer because he didn't live in the continental US for most of his formative years. So he wasn't exposed to the same stuff that I was exposed to. Military brat, right? Like overseas, completely different experience as opposed to mine. So I think part of the challenge I see with the generational bands is like being careful not to use that brush too liberally. That being said, there are some truisms in the way people tend to think. So, for example, the way people approach work, right? Boomers and Xers are less likely to demand time off, whereas the younger millennials especially, and the Gen Zers are like, this is my PTO, I'm taking it. My well-being matters more to me than some artificial sense of loyalty to an organization that certainly hasn't been loyal to my parents or grandparents. Why should I give an F about what they think about me? So that's a big piece of it. And as a result, those are diametrically opposed perspectives on what work means. And those lead to some really interesting attitudes towards each other. I think we see, we've had the okay boomer thing that came around a few years ago, understandably so. And millennials these days, from the older generations, and nobody's really right because they're all using these stereotypes as an excuse for behavior or to marginalize people as opposed to find common ground or collaborative compromises where they can still coexist and accomplish the same goals. And I do want to tag something that Younger said earlier. I'm former military too, and I think one of the ways the military benefits us is when you move into a leadership space in the military, they give you typically some leadership training. It may not be perfect, but you do get some actual leadership skills training in how to lead people. We don't see that in the corporate life, right? You are probably a really good widget maker, and that makes you a potential widget maker supervisor. Two completely different skill sets, but they're not giving managers or people leaders typically any training on how to navigate that. So they can't have those crucial conversations. They can't navigate those generational differences. They're just like flinging oil and water around willy-nilly like Muppets flailing around, and it's pretty ugly.
Yeah, I like the Muppets references. Good. Um, jumping over to Marci. Marci,
Sound like Kermit.
Right? The one voice I can do realistically. Marci, what about you in your side of things? How does the generational difference kind of affect as you speak to people or how you deal with things or that kind of stuff?
Well, because I'm really functioning as an educator. When I wrote my book, I wrote it with the idea of this is going to be for younger adults and help explain these financial things they're going to be stepping into for the first time. And that's where I put my focus. And I was like, older adults, they've been doing this for a while. They got it. I don't have to think about them. And then as I started speaking and communicating, whatever else, I found all these older adults that not only didn't know it, but wanted to learn it. And it just kind of shifted everything. But it doesn't really change much of the way that I present things other than retirement information, because the older they are, boomers and above had pension plans, maybe not for a long time, but they had pension plans. And so when it shifted from to 401ks, they didn't really understand the concept of self-funding for retirement and for these other things. Whereas the younger you are, this was something that was kind of hammered into you. There isn't a pension, there isn't a whatever else. And so they're more receptive to certain ideas about things being self-funded, and not expecting things to come. So it's a matter of certain things, certain financial aspects that one group is more or less open to. But the information that I'm putting out is the same. No matter what aspect of things I'm explaining, it's the same. It's a matter of whether someone will ask me a question openly because they don't expect anyone else of their group will know it, or whether they feel they've got to. I want you to know I don't know this. Can you explain it? But not let anyone know I'm the one who doesn't know it. But my answers and the information are the same, so it doesn't impact too much of what I do and how I do it.
Interesting. So, I mean, that's a wonderful concept of truth being the same no matter where it's at in time, right? It might be presented differently, but it's the same facts, the same patterns, the same all of the above. Interesting. Younger, jumping over to you. Don't bandwagon. We're still on my question. I see you thinking too hard right now. But in our side of things, how do you think the generational things hit? And more for us, it's probably more of a additions than generations.
Actually gonna hit on that exactly. And the fact is Dungeons and Dragons have been around, conceptually since like 1972 with chainmail, officially in 1974 with its first boxed cardboard publication. And if you look at that book, it is like significantly closer, but mechanically entirely different than 5th edition. 2nd edition, 1st edition, very comparable. Just kind of like it was labeled Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but it was more or less mechanically the same. 3rd edition, 3.5, an explosion of thoughts and ideas. It blossomed into an uncontrollable monster beyond anybody's feasible level of comprehensions. And then people were like, well, that's cool and all, but like we should like make more money off this and change it up. And then they made 4th edition. And then everybody unanimously came together and said that this is a failure. We hate it. Go burn somewhere. This is garbage. and they were like, we were just trying to make it more accessible to people. And from the ashes rose the phoenix, known as 5th edition, which blossomed and originally was like very simple. It was like, oh yes, this is going to be simple, but still equally canon and encompassing as 3.5. And then it began to have its own, phalanges go out and grow. But if you talk to any Dungeons and Dragons player older than Rook, they're going to swear up and down about 3.5 until they are blue in the face about like, oh yes, how great it is, and da 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 da. And if you talk to people even older than that, they're like, oh well, like I remember when instead of using dice, we just reached into a bag and we pulled out numbers and stuff. And so it's just like but I think the part where they can all come together at is the fact of it's an element of storytelling and getting a bunch of friends together, and like creating a cohesive story. And really the mechanic behind it is less important. The only thing that's important about it is that it's comfortable and understandable to the players within the capacity that they want to engage.
I think that's an excellent way to say that. I'm not going to add any more, except for there are other TTRPGs out there, right? And that's kind of the next phase for a lot of people is figuring out what category they prefer, because they are in a generation of options, which is both a wonderful and terrible thing to be in. As if you are decision paralysis monster is on your shoulder at all times, it can be really hard to deal with. And sometimes sticking with that classic is always the best. But we always encourage people to at least try new things. Step into bravery, which I'm gonna co-steal at this point. Something new and exciting. Jumping into our kind of final thoughts for the thing, because we're almost at an hour here. We'll just go down the line and end with being younger and talk about our silliness. But final thoughts, and then we'll go back again and get your outros and whatnot. So, Dr. Sarah, what are your final thoughts on this? Younger's interrupting me. What's up, buddy?
I was actually gonna hit on a part of generational change with Money Marci stuff. Is like you didn't mention it, but I was just thinking. I was talking to my grandmother, and I was like, like your quarters had silver, right? Like that was a real thing. Like there was real intrinsic value in that shit. And now they're not. And she was like, there was silver in quarters? And it was like, what do you like? You lived in it. How do you not know? And the simple fact is the education system across all of the timelines just simply does not inform the population on a lot of the stuff that, might be beneficial to know, especially when it comes to making responsible and financial decisions for yourself and your family, since the credit was established. And that's not really the priority of those institutions that, finance or, that you finance.
Younger,
stuff,
you keep this up. We're going to talk
all
for
about
another hour. I'm cutting you off here. We
sorry.
gotta wrap.
Sorry. I had to say it.
Anyway, with Younger's final thought in there, again, jumping back to Dr. Sarah, what are your final thoughts on this concept of inconstant groups or oil and water mixing and how you deal with it in your expertise?
I love inconstant groups because I think they bring a breath of fresh air, a set of fresh eyes, and they get us out of the ever-present danger of groupthink echo chambers. They do bring with them an element of complexity, but so what? Life is more complex than we want to acknowledge anyway. So I would say if we can get comfortable being uncomfortable, we're going to have a much better chance of navigating the natural shenanigans and the unnatural ones that pop up. So I say we embrace the oil and the water and keep them mixing.
I like that. Solid final thought. Money Marci.
Well, I agree with her. I mean, the opportunities to learn and to grow when you get the oil and you water and you have the opportunity to hear each other, really listen to each other and learn from that. It helps you to build and grow. We talked about goals for a partial of a minute a while ago, and the difference between dreams and goals is the one that you're making a plan for and working toward. And the best way to build a plan is to gather information. Not so much that you get into analysis paralysis, but take that step forward with the information you've gained, and it gives you an opportunity to see more things. And Younger, you don't scare me if we talk for another hour, because I am so caffeinated to be up now. I'll be going all night.
I was going to say we'll save that for the after show because I love talking about it too. It's a problem and it needs to stop before it gets started. It's all I'm saying because me and him can talk about it for too long. But that being said, that being said, Younger, final thoughts on our topic. We'll talk about the money fun stuff afterwards. Dang it.
Okay, of the oil and water, I do think what Dr. Sarah said was like having a healthy balance, right, of both. But if you go and you look at it from a financial aspect, you probably shouldn't just take all of your money and your assets and your time and your effort and throw it at one particular thing. Because if that thing fails, there's no catch net, fall net. You're just going down with the ship. You might diversify your assets 50% over here and then 50% towards your progress. That way, if you lose it all, at least you have this much to fall back on. And if you make gains, you can like have a little bit of wiggle room to play with. And you can move forward in a progress-focused manner that will be to your benefit. And if it's not, you're not going to sink with the ship. You can buy a new sail, plug a new hole. That's my final thoughts. Final.
He says that. All right, and then last but not least, let's get the exit outro. The word I'm looking for is outro. Damn. On you guys, who you are, where you're at, all that fun stuff, where people can find you, and any things about your stuff that you guys want to promote last minute. So we're gonna start with Dr. Sarah again. Dr. Sarah, tell us about yourself one more time.
So real quickly, I'm Dr. Sarah Ratekin. I am a workplace happiness and gratitude researcher and consultant, helping organizations figure out why people hate their jobs and how to fix that. I am super easy to find. If you go to happinessiscourage.com, all of my links are there. I keynote speaking, corporate workshops, and just a shoulder to cry on sometimes because work is hard.
Agreed. Money Marci, and you.
I am at moneymarci.com. I am a CPA with over 30 years of experience. I'm a second-generation CPA, so I've been talking about money my whole life. And if you go to my website, all my links are there. I'm on social media. I have books and workbooks on Amazon, links to useful worksheets on my website. And I love getting questions and stories, and I'm working on an app, very excited about that. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. But I hope to hear from you, and this has been a blast.
Fantastic. All right, our silliness. We got new products coming in. Hopefully this Monday we got fun revolver dice coming in, along with a whole bunch of other things. I found lockets and mini dice and all kinds of fun stuff. So check out the website later for that. Speaking of the website, thanks for watching. If you're watching, make sure to subscribe. If you're on the Twitch, go check out our YouTubes and all of our other fun stuff. Everything's under Epic Sages except for our TikTok, which is under Rook Talk. Discount for this month. It's new. We're in a new month, right? We're in September now. Younger, what do we want our discount code to be for this month? He says he ain't saying nothing. We're gonna do Wake Me Up 907, Wake Me Up 907, because we're not gonna talk until September ends. One more lame reference before we go. Anything else that I'm missing, Younger? We have one other event this month, and then most of our other stuff is going to be in October for vendor stuff. Other than that, you'll catch us on the other week for the podcast stuff. Star Wars next week. Don't forget, Avatar is still doing its thing, and Star Wars is having its first actual session 1, next Wednesday. I've made a whole bunch of music for that, so prepare yourselves, and I apologize ahead of time. With all that in mind, with adventure in mind, I hope you all have a wonderful time. Stick around for the music. Bye.
Step into epic sages. is where your journey begins. Our shelves are stacked high where the magic never ends. From dice that roll true to tomes ancient and wise, we got all the essentials for your game to arise. With adventure in mind, we craft every piece to make your campaign flourish, your stories increase. For every TTRPG dream, our stock is refined. Come find your next quest, leave the mundane behind. Epic sections, where you find satisfaction. We bring us one, you bring compassion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic sections, relentless like traction. Online stores a wonderland, easy to explore. With service that shines, whether in person or more. Need advice on your journey? We're here to assist. For novice and veteran, no wish will be missed. We've got what you need from the basic to the grand, to bring your world to life with a masterful hand. From maps that expand to characters that bind, the sages always with adventure in mind. Epic Sections is where you find satisfaction. We bring the spark, you bring the passion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic Sections, relentless like traction. Elevate your game with custom pieces so fine, handcrafted with care, designed to make you shine. From miniature heroes to landscapes vast, we build every detail to make the magic last. When the final dice is rolled and the journey is done, we offer pieces that remind you of the battles you won. In every treasure we offer, memories are signed. The sages always with adventure in mind. Epic Sections, where you find satisfaction. We bring the spark, you bring the passion. We control the board, you control the action. Epic Sections, relentless like traction. Epic Sections is where you find satisfaction.